what's the response of higher education authorities in trying to adapt more to your more flexible ways of presenting these doctorates? I mean, how do the tutors and the universities and the regulations and the rules and the academic practices around all this, how are they responding to what is clearly your more creative needs and demands?
I think that that's very specific on whichever institution and whichever school. So EThOS covers 139 institutions, all with different rules. So things that came up today, was a lot of places with art schools and practice-based PhDs were a bit more ready for multimedia in that they would accept bigger file sizes. But then other disciplines, like with architecture, with that amazingly small file size. So I think it's all. And this project is the start of a conversation. So this is something very much happening now. So we're at the start of it, and I don't know if people want to say their own experiences with their specific institution.
I think ultimately there's an 80,000 word thesis that needs to be handed in, and there are reasons why that's the case, and primarily that it needs to be assessed, so and I think that's the same from undergraduate, it's the same from 6-year-olds through to undergraduates, through master's students and so on and so forth, so that I can kind of understand why a thesis needs to be in a particular shape. What I will say is that Professor Nick Gebhardt, one of my supervisors, has kind of encouraged us, and there's about 8 or 9 of us who are kind of broadly speaking dealing with popular music within the school. We've had a thing called Right Club, which we're not allowed to talk about. The first rule of Right Club. So I've already broken the rules by telling you. But we meet every 3 weeks and we write 2,000 words. But that's kind of outside of your standard kind of cookie cutter. So I think in terms of what Coral's saying, how it might change, it's going to be. This won't be a surprise to anybody that knows academic institutions. It's going to be an incremental change. So it might be the fact that a more creative aspect comes in, or a more kind of a loose element here comes in with your writing. So I wouldn't expect straight away for people like the 3 of us to be able to go, yeah, here's a PhD thesis, but as long as stakeholders involved in the process kind of buy into it, then I think we'll get there.
I think to kind of build on that, everyone that I've dealt with has been very enthusiastic, like, great, creativity's brilliant, but then, they're not experts in everything. They don't necessarily know how to deal with architectural buildings or 2-meter long drawings or video games. And so it's a constant dialogue, because when you're kind of pushing up against the boundary of what's possible, it always has to be a two-way street. So it's as much on us to kind of engage in that dialogue, especially with people like Coral and with the British Library, as well as with our own institutions, and to keep that dialogue going in a positive way and not just a, no, you can't.
I know within architecture as a discipline, this conversation has been happening for quite a long time, but at the moment, certainly from where I'm stood, it feels like it's just a conversation. There's an understanding there's a need for it. There are people I know doing PhDs by design, but there's still a lot of conversation about what this means, what this is, and how that works. So within the discipline, that's going on, but then you've got the institution level above that. So you've got the different tiers of kind of bureaucracy. So some people are saying, yeah, do this, it'd be great. Go and innovate, go and push the boundaries, and then somewhere along the line you end up with that brick wall that just says, but you need a thesis, but you need 64 megabytes, and that's either I think, as far as I'm aware, that's my library, but I don't know who to ask about that, and that's part of the problem, is knowing who knows the answers to the questions that you want, and I don't know.
Is that because is it because that the institution level, it has to be one size fits all, and actually within each department might have different needs and different drivers and different digital concepts and different digital outputs being produced, but the rules around research output submission, whether it's a PhD level or even a higher research level, there has to be rules that cover the whole university.
I suspect so. I mean, I don't know the inner workings of the university bureaucracy system to know that yes, that's the answer. That's what I think is going on. But then you've also got the department sort of level where every discipline believes they're special, which we are, obviously. I mean, every discipline is unique. Every discipline has its own criteria, has its own outputs, has its own understanding. But the university probably needs to actually go, hang on a minute, I know you're all special, but you're all not that special. we need to be a unified body of something. So I would guess that's what's going on.
The pace of change, I come from a commercial background, so going into a university, you know, it was like being dropped into a combat zone, you know, because you just kind of go, well, actually not a combat zone, whatever the opposite is, but you know, you just kind of go, well, the things move so slowly, it's quite astonishing, you know, and they're so big, these places, that a drawing or a video game or an API or whatever it is that we're coming up with, you know, there's a good phrase of, you know, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission, you know, and I think that might be that's your route, I think, through, because no one's going to let you hand in and no one's going to let you hand in a bit, right. So there you go, you know. So you make the case for what you're doing, you know, and if you're doing your job with a PhD, you know, if you're generating this new contribution to knowledge, then really you should have the confidence to say, well, no one can really challenge me on this because this is a new contribution to knowledge. So you know, nobody knows what I know.
But you do need someone to sign a piece of paper and say, yes, right now you can call yourself a doctor.
Yeah.
I kind of want that.
Well, that's where the tension is.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of I guess where it's baby steps rather than. Sorry, I'm going on, but I don't think if you put out a roadmap now and said this is the way we should do it, it wouldn't necessarily be workable in 5 years' time. You know, it's more iterative.
And we should keep innovating and keep pushing. And I think at PhD level research, that's what we should be doing. So, sorry, I want to go back.
I don't come from an academic background, but all of the PhDs that you've been talking about today, they've got very kind of popular appeal as well. So you've got, you know, the literary from thorugh, you've got popular music, and you've got the gaming as well. So, and I don't know how the publication of PhDs work, you know, whether it's kind of, you know, what is published is going to go into an archive for so many years before anybody else can read it or something like that. But I just kind of, I know that Chris has published Archive, and Imogen, you did the exhibition as well. So how much, you know, you're saying we can't put this into the PhD itself, but how much can you actually make use of what you've created as a multimedia aspect to kind of share it with a much wider population and make use of kind of what you've done in that way as well? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's like, I've been paid by public money to do this for 3 years, you know. Ultimately, so there's part of me. Well, there's a big part of me that says, well, I have a responsibility to disseminate this knowledge and not just sit on it. So that's definitely informed my thinking in the sense that within the constraints of kind of ethics and data privacy and so on and so forth, the data goes out there, the code goes out there. Doing events like this and saying, so yeah, they have a popular appeal, and you have I think as a researcher, a PhD researcher, or any kind of researcher, really, you have a responsibility to disseminate knowledge, and you're not necessarily a keeper of that knowledge. You're just someone that facilitates that, and that might sound very arrogant. I hope it doesn't, but I've learnt what I've learnt in the last 2.5 years. I would like to share that.
I think you run into some interesting problems as well, where it's sort of the PhD is sort of conceived of as having like a beginning and an end, and things that overrun that, you can end up sort of plagiarizing yourself under the university sort of structure, and you can also end up put in sort of circumstances where copyright becomes a problem, and you can have copyright issues with yourself. So one of the big things that I contend with my work is that I put my games up into like easily accessible online platforms, and I've had to stop doing that because the university essentially said there is a very real chance that you will run into a copyright infringement on yourself by doing it this way. So you have to wait until your thing is published before you can do this. So there's this kind of interesting dynamic in, I guess the structures that we have are not necessarily up to date with what we're producing and what we're researching. And a lot of institutions are quite on board with either turning a blind eye or adapting their policies to get on board with this. But certainly there is a lot of issues with how public institutions are willing to let theses be or research be. And sometimes this is for very good reasons like privacy, human data, and sometimes it's just for really weird, antiquated, or kind of things that don't quite line up with what we're doing with our research.
Question, especially for Tara, but it's for others as well. As an archaeologist that wrote a really traditional PhD, I'd like to know what's the reaction of your of other PhD students in your discipline to the type of PhD that you're producing?
I generally go out and I work, and as a field archaeologist, you kind of expect, or like I would know my reaction to myself would be like, what is this girl doing? Can you not? But you kind of see that when you sit down with people and you show them what you're doing and how it changes how you can think about the past and how you can write about it and how you can actually communicate that to other people, they're like, oh, I get it. And I have like a number of different quotations which is just like, it's radicalized the way which I can actually think about archaeology. So I think it's that thing about the process though, right? It's like, if I just say I do games in archaeology, people are like, oh, that's cute, good for you. But it's not until you actually sit down and engage them into that and sort of actually allow them to participate in your project as well that you really get the value. And then you run into the problems of, well, how do I actually record and publish that? But yeah.
Can I just make an observation as well? Because I've been following Tara's work as a fellow PhD student in the same department, but also because there's another PhD student in archaeogaming as well, and there seems to be this rise of this kind of archaeological gaming kind of culture. I don't know if you wanted to add a bit more to that. Tara, I don't know as much as you do.
Yeah, definitely. It's sort of, I don't know, like 2 or 3 years ago it just didn't exist. When I first proposed my PhD project, people laughed at me, like openly laughed, not like, oh, like really genuinely shot me down. And kind of progressively over the last 3 years, it's become a very like accepted field of study, and not only accepted, but we've seen the value and how this can change how we're engaging with the public. For people like Megan Dennis, who's engaging with ethics and the production of games at a commercial level, as well as how we can actually do our discipline as archaeologists on my end of the spectrum. So it's sort of, there's been a real change, I guess, through the actual practice of making these documents, through the production of these theses, and how archaeology and games, and especially the games industry, can interact and produce. So it's quite exciting as to where that will go, because it is obviously a very new discipline of study as well.
I think you've got two different languages, because I find I'm doing within my PhD, which is, so I'm from a curatorial background, but I'm also developing a sort of visualisations of collection data, but big collection data, so using immersive environments. So if I want to talk to people within my area about that, they don't have the language to talk about the technical side. So I'm quite early in my PhD, but I'm already worried that if I'm describing a lot in text, the people who I really want to get this won't understand the language that I need to use. So that's a barrier, and they need to experience and to use what I'm proposing to understand it. And then also, you know, there's that other side of, for a non-academic audience, I also need them to use it because that's how they're going to engage with it. So it becomes very important, I think, when you are crossing disciplines and you're crossing different sort of technical language, that people can actually understand process and understand, so I guess, through using what you're developing. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt as well. The other thing to remember is it's not surprising that this is confusing to everybody, not just, you know, us or academics or everybody. We've only been doing this stuff for kind of like 20 years, you know. It took 40 years after Edison invented sound recording for records to come on. You know, radio took 20 years to take hold. You know, we're only kind of 20 years into this digital thing. Some of us, no, I'm only 22, but you know, some of us are older, some of us are younger. But it's going to take us a while. Plymouth says this as well. You know, we evolve with technologies. You know, so it's going to take us a while.
Alan?
So it's sort of it's a very broad question, so I'll frame it a little bit. So I've got a PhD, happens to be in neuroscience. I work in, and I don't work on anything to do with neuroscience. And I worked in academia, and I worked in drug industry. And okay, so the framing of the question is, knowledge exchange from research is different to getting a PhD, in my opinion. And you can have far greater impact, for example, in biomedicine, in applying that understanding in different ways rather than just publishing academic papers. And I can understand that you guys are in a scenario where you're trying to do something which is about genuinely sharing information and knowledge, but there's a traditional mode in which you have to, if you want to, get a PhD. So I'm interested in what you feel is the function of the PhD in your particular circumstances. What is the meaning of the PhD in your particular circumstances?
Then I'll give the glib answer. But go on.
Okay, well, so partly for me it's a way of legitimising what I do. There is an understanding that if you have done a PhD in a subject that you know about it. So part of it is actually being able to stand up to academics. So the reception I get when I talk to students is great. They know what I'm talking about, they know why I want to change the language, or at least provide a new form of language that we can talk about architecture. When I talk to academics in my subject, things get a little bit sticky because you end up some of them are kind of not repulsed, but they're kind of, there's an arrogance within the academic circles that basically says, well, I have a PhD, I'm a doctor, I'm an academic, and therefore what I do is the way it should be done. So part of it is so that I can stand on the same level and say, right, actually, I'm an academic, I've got a PhD, and this is why you should listen to me. Part of it is because I really want to wear the silly hat. So it's kind of, swings and roundabouts really. But I the reason I'm doing it is because it's important, and this was a way in, basically.
Yeah.
Two reasons. First one is daft. Second one is serious. First one is when you're on an aeroplane and someone gets taken ill. If you're a doctor in the house, I want to be the guy that stands up and says, I know quite a lot about the Bee Gees. I may not be able to save his life, but the second reason is, it's kind of the final hoop to jump through, isn't it? You can't kind of go and then the way academic funding is set up and all that sort of stuff. You can't be a PI on a project unless you've got a PhD and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm quite you don't do one without the other. Do you know what I mean? So there's the whole being on the playing bit, and there's the whole, if I want to research popular music more or digital culture more or whatever, I need this under my belt so that people will give me money in order to do it. And it's as simple as that, really. And yeah, it's quite cool to be Dr. Crane, I suppose, you know.
I think as well, I kind of quite naively went into it thinking that you have 3 years of freedom to research what you're passionate about, and that you get to do that in the way which you want to. And you slowly realize that that's not really the case. Like, you do have to conform to these boundaries. But more than that, like, as I moved to publishing in journals, as I moved to publishing chapters of books, those constraints exist everywhere in the academic world. It's not like you get freedom in your PhD, or you suddenly get out of your PhD and can transmit knowledge in however you want to. Like, it's part of a big structure, right? Like, and we're all players in it.
Yep.
So I guess we sort of conceive of this like transmission versus the function of a PhD as being two, not necessarily opposite things, but being like one serves a function and one is like what you do once you've got the PhD. But I think that they're part of the continuum, and the symptoms that we suffer in both of them are part of the bigger structure rather than just a symptom of one thing. Yeah.
I think I left, so I kind of left industries, museums, industry, whatever, to, I suppose, to do my PhD, and I was working in exhibitions collections, and I honestly thought, I have an idea that can help, and I can make an original contribution, and by being given funding for it, it gives me space and it gives me time to develop this thing, and hopefully make that original contribution. And in terms of the thesis, because I'm heavily invested in the idea of collection, and I started in libraries and then went on to archives before working in museums, I like that I am going to become part of this knowledge bubble, and I want to be represented, and I want my work to be represented well within the knowledge bubble. And if no one opens the book and looks at my knowledge, that's one thing, but I want to know I'm in there, and that is important to me.
Yeah, all completely fascinating, and I really appreciate the problem of doing lots of digital things which you can't put into it. I'm doing transmedia writing, 80% of what my PhD is a thing. It's a text thing, it's a novel, and then I have to write about it. But with all of the, particularly the architecture of Mervyn Peake, which sounds fascinating, but it did. I mean, what I did want to know was lots of questions about why, rather than the thing itself. So I can see the other side of it, that because these are new forms, I want to ask questions about what you've been doing in digital, rather than just look at the stuff.
Yeah.
Do you feel ultimately that writing about why you've made choices is sort of the core of what you're doing?
So a lot of the writing about the choices is in the appendix. I have, so I have documented the mapping process, so why each thing is in the place that it is. I have Word documents that detail this. I have the giant Excel table, which is not what you should do that Excel for, but that's how I did, that documents all the data that I found. I have Word files which have all of the extracts for each space as a database. So if I say, right, I need to find out, I need to refresh my memory on the Tower of Flint, I have a Word document for the Tower of Flint of all the text that mentions it. But most of that isn't going to be there at all, because the Word documents in themselves are a substantial stack of paper, and I can't bring myself to do all the trees in for that. And I know that no one's going to flick through and read them, because they might as well read the book. It's much more interesting to most people to read the book in the order that he wrote it, rather than me extracting all of his text about a particular space. But also, the thesis that I'm writing is not very methodological, really. I talk about how I've done it, I talk about why I've done it, but the main body of the chapter is actually architectural philosophy. So it's become something other than what I thought it was going to be. So, you know, it goes into Derrida, it goes into all sorts of things that you think, well, I didn't really know it was going to do this at the beginning, but it's kind of become its own entity.
Are you going to do architectural drawings for other contemporary literature?
If someone pays me to do it, I will.
I'd be interested in why you asked that question though, because why did you ask that question?
Well, I was thinking with your project, you know, there's the issues about how you deal with these thousands and thousands of records, but I mean not albums, but digital records.
Yeah.
But really, I wanted to talk to you about that point where you decided to be more interested in the big data rather than interested in writing a kind of more subjective overview of or picking out the good bits, or you know, those sorts of questions again about what it's for and your perceptions of it.
Well, yeah, that's
another.
I think I think the process is more interesting than the. I talked about it with Kat earlier when we talked about ethnography and we talked about data and all that sort of stuff. And there are so many different ways you could slice it, you know. So I've chosen to go down this particular route with my data, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right way or it's the most productive way. But it's the way that will jump through the hoop and make me the guy that saves the guy's life on the plane, or not. Sorry.
Sorry, you had your hand.
Yes, I was wondering what sort of help and response would you like to get from librarians when you use different publishing methods? Because obviously you would be more interested in your actual research in the medium, and while librarians can be the one who says your files are too large, they are also the ones who could help provide an infrastructure and help you solve the copyright issues, because that should be their area of expertise rather than yours. You're expert in your fields, but they should be the information. Like I've gathered that you didn't choose these methods of presenting your research because you were interested in the method, but rather you were interested in putting your research out in the best way. Yeah. So how would you have been helped by library information professionals to, like, how would you like to be helped by them?
That's a big question.
I don't really have a lot to do with the library at BCU, so the extent to my involvement with the library at BCU is I have a fine which I don't pay, or
it's a very traditional view of libraries.
Yeah, or I've ordered I've ordered a document and they've delivered for me and they're great at that. It's not really genuinely, it's not something I've considered, you know, as a route out. I put my stuff on GitHub, I put my stuff online, and all of that sort of stuff. So I haven't been asked yet to format in such a way that I would give it to a library, or if that makes sense. But
Yeah, but at the same time, the library should be able to store the same things. Like you go to GitHub because there is no institutional repositories, you have to find your own solutions. So
yeah.
Well, for everyone else who writes a PDF, they will just say, here, our open archive, please publish. And they are coming up with solutions for how to publish your research data as well, but they're lacking. So that's a symptom of lacking infrastructure in one way, isn't it?
Well, maybe, yeah, you know, maybe if I could give my library my R code, or you know, as terrible as it is, you know, it's far from exemplary R code. But if I could give that to them and they could put it somewhere, then yes, perhaps. But it's just not a conversation I've ever had.
It's more nuanced than that, though, isn't it? Because the point of power in here is who's funding your research and what mandate they give to, like, if it's a research council, what mandate the research council has to the universities around what they should accept as thesis submissions, and everything would follow from that. And that's a long process, which probably isn't going to help you guys. I reckon there's very practical things that you're talking about now that can make a difference, but in the longer term it's going to be acceptable as a PhD.
Put it this way, speaking very, very frankly, after 2 glasses of wine, being on Radio 4 made the AHRC very about the fact that they funded my research, but the kind of infrastructure that I'm putting in place around my data, you know, is a different kind of thing, you know, which is symptomatic of how academia is. It's all kind of impact, you know. We're in different disciplines, but if we were all popular music scholars, we'd be secretly, you know, backstage, you know, because we'd all be competing for the same pot of money, you know. We can all be friends because it's archaeology, you know, it's different money.
Reassuring to hear.
Pardon me?
It's very reassuring to hear. Very good.
I think that one of the things that specifically has been happening in the library that I'm associated with is that we're both stumbling around in the dark, right? Like, we have no idea. Like, they don't know about games, I don't know about libraries and copyright. Like, I'm figuring out as I go, they're figuring out what I do as they go. But one of the things that we're working really hard on doing is capturing the process of what we're going through and trying to make a best practice guide that we can kind of then give to the next person, and that they can then be like, well, this is rubbish because this doesn't help me, and they can add to that or build it and refine it. And so that it kind of goes back to this thing of having a dialogue, right? Like, I have to be willing to go talk to the library, and they have to be willing to listen to me. And both of our time is at a premium. And there's a lot of sort of economic structures that sit behind why that's the case. So it requires people to kind of be quite willing not only to be open with their process, but also with their time as well. So I guess to go to your question, which is what would I expect, or what would be the ideal situation from a library, would just be the willingness to talk and to actually build things that could have impact later on from my research as well. Yeah.
We're having this conversation in the library, so that's
Yes.
quite, I think that's quite exciting, and that's.
Are you a librarian?
Oh yes, I am.
But a proactive way of would be nice, because I don't know in my library who I should be talking to about this. But it would be nice if the library sort of stood up at, you know, day one of PhD and said, right, if you're going to be doing something that's not your bog standard PDF, these are the people you can talk to. We are aware, for a start, that you exist, which I'm not entirely convinced the university does know sometimes, or sort of the library, the middle management level, I guess, that's where I'm sort of aiming that at, is that there's a lot, because it suffers from big institution syndrome. There's a lot of things going on that no one really knows about, or there's links that don't really connect, or they do connect, but actually you don't know who to ask. And I would love just to know who to ask, to say, look, I need help, I've been told this is what my document, this submission document says, what can I do with this?
Do you have a research librarian?
I'm sure
I mean,
I
that's
do.
the job of the research
I'm sure I do.
If you
To be
can
honest,
find out who it is,
Yeah.
talk to
a
them.
lot of it is on me, because I have not gone into the library and said,
Yeah.
look, I need this help, because I've got
Well,
other
it should
things.
be on the
But
library website.
Yeah,
research
and
librarian.
I'm sure it is, but actually, as you said, you know, time and money and life and all of this,
Yeah.
What would you
it's
like
just
to
something else, yeah.
Well, now that you asked, I thought this best practice you're writing is a really good example, because if libraries, the people who do multimedia theses communicate with libraries, and libraries can collect best practices, those best practices could be put together, and that could perhaps also change research councils. Because
exactly.
that's how you so by gathering more contributions to this field, you would be able to develop and learn from each other, and that would also change the research grant process, I would imagine.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
also because there is such a buzz around digital humanities at the moment, so, you know, anytime you say digital humanities, people will give you money. So,
So
I think by developing
Yeah,
best practices and collecting
Yeah.
them, that's it.
And I think that's the conversation we're having, and it's a really exciting conversation. And also, you know, we're in a period of great flux and digital flux, and this is current innovation. And I think it's incumbent on researchers to constantly push. And I think in terms of specific research librarians, you know, my research librarian sits in the School of Art and Design Media. They don't have specific knowledge of the area I'm working in and the things that I produce, and there can be a dialogue, but it doesn't mean that within the time that I'm doing my PhD, I'm going to be able to represent work in the way I'm choosing. But then, you know, this is a constant dialogue and a constant change, and just as the methods we have of representing things will grow and change, you know, so will the thesis, and long may it continue. So we'll go to the back row.
I wanted to say, so you picked up on Marshall McLuhan earlier, and the idea the medium is the message. I think all three of you are working in a research culture that actually embraces that, and it recognises the way in which you do something is in fact a kind of means of knowledge knowing. But one of the things I actually want to pick up on is a point that you just made, and actually the need to speak with scientists. Because in the future, the Whitehall, there's various kind of discussions about the idea of all the research councils becoming one big research council, and that all funds would be then distributed down in that regard. So anyone who was applying for a science grant within the impact agenda would have to show the way in which they're going to communicate that to other people who aren't scientists. And the way in which scientists are currently interpreting this is the idea of getting artists on board, or those who have art-based qualities in order to communicate their research. Not without necessarily an explicit awareness of the cultures of medium is the message. And we have to be quite clear, but also actually quite collaborative about how we approach those conversations, but having evidence points, and actually your case studies are part of those evidence points, but also being confident in those arguments. So when the other arguments come back to us, or more, not really arguments, sometimes assumptions on what it is that the arts and humanities do, and actually having kind of informed evidence-based positions on those is the best way to have a strong collegiate future in universities in particular. And if we want to get funding, that is.
Yeah, sorry I've got to be a killjoy.
It's a nice point to end on.
But I thought that was a really good point to end on actually. And is it okay if I take over for a second, Coral? Yeah, so obviously thanks everyone for coming along. I haven't got the date of the next event, but if you follow British Library Digital Research Team on Twitter, then we will be advertising on there. We've also got the British Library Digital Scholarship blog. So
we'll be reporting on this next week.
And Coral has written 2 guest blog posts this week, and we'll be writing about this event in the blog. So please do follow the blog. I've actually put the blog up. And I just want to thank, in fact I will call the blog up, but I just want to thank Coral, thank Tara, thank Imogen, and thank Craig. I think that was really excellent. Thank you guys for coming along, and I've just realised I've been very lax and not give any feedback forms out. But I hope you've had a really, really good night. And if you've enjoyed coming along tonight, please do come along to our future events. We have got a British Library Labs Symposium on the 7th of November, and that's a day event. It's a free event, and that's focusing on the digital research projects that British Library Labs have supported. So if you do search for that and that floats your boat, then please do come along to that. Thanks everyone. Safe journey home.